What we've really found is that when we pair calves together at a young age, so we're talking before 14 days of age, we see lots of social facilitation benefits, meaning that these calves are going to start consuming calf starter younger, and they're going to consume oftentimes more than the individually housed calves.
Hello everyone, this is Luis Ferreiro with the Dairy Nutrition Blackbelt Podcast, and today we'll be discussing about calves. And to help us better understand a very specific topic related to calves, I have Melissa Cantor from the Penn State University to help us understand a lot of things associated with pair housing and the importance of that for calves.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for the warm welcome.
But Melissa, pair housing is a topic that we see a lot of discussion, not only in the scientific community, but by the industry as well, right? So guide us a little bit through some of the benefits associated with this practice.
Yeah, absolutely. So pair housing, I get lots and lots of questions about that, particularly, and I say this around the world, Tesco is a large retailer in the United Kingdom. And a couple of years ago, back in around 2018, they mandated pair housing. And because of that, the research in the UK has exploded on pair housing. And now the United States, North America, and UBC way back in the day, British Columbia, they've done a lot of research in this area. And what we've really found is that when we pair calves together at a young age, so we're talking before 14 days of age, we see lots of social facilitation benefits, meaning that these calves are going to start consuming calf starter younger, and they're going to consume oftentimes more than the individually housed calves. Now, the caveat to that, however, is that based on a scoping review that one of my graduate students did in this topic, you have to offer at least 7 liters a day of milk to get those benefits. So that's a really important factor, because if you're going to still do conventional milk feeding, you're not going to get all of the growth benefits that we tend to see with this type of housing.
Fortiva is moving beyond feed additives to create foundational ingredients that work with your dairy operation to support resilience and health. With proven technologies like Amulet and Efficient Z, Fortiva helps you address the toughest challenges in dairy production, from gut health to growth performance. Together we can make animals more resilient in the face of future challenges. Learn how at fortivaimpact.com.
And one of the reasons that we hear people discussing about for not actually transitioning to pair housing will be some abnormal behaviors that could occur when those calves are paired together. For example, cross-sucking, right? And explain us a little bit about how common that is, not only cross-sucking, but any other abnormal behavior that you see under those conditions, and why we should be worried about that. I'm assuming worried is the correct word here.
Sure. No, that's a great point. So I'm going to go ahead and do a plug for pair housing related to social benefits first, and then I'm going to talk about abnormal behavior. So when we talk about pair housing with calves, I mentioned social facilitation, and certainly that's a huge benefit. That means monkey see, monkey do. These calves see each other eating, they go to eat together, etc. And we also know cognitively these calves are different, so they're going to be more competitive than an individually housed calf. They're going to adjust to a new group better, which we know is super important for dairy. We're always moving cows to new groups. They're going to adjust to a new diet better, which is really important when we think about switching calves from grain to a total mixed ration or something like that. That can be beneficial, and they're less aggressive in general. So we know there's a lot of benefits for them. However, there is the negative side that we see this abnormal cross-sucking, intersucking behavior. If you're a behaviorist, you're calling it intersucking. If you're a nutritionist or a farmer, you're calling it cross-sucking. What this means is that calves are going to suck on the underside or the belly or even in between the tail or the legs of another calf. This is a concern for producers. Dr. Jennifer Van Oss there at UW-Madison did a wonderful survey asking producers, what are your hesitancies to adopting pair housing? And it was very clear that veterinarians and producers had strong agreement that cross-sucking was a concern. Why? Well, cross-sucking has been linked in some studies, but not all studies, to be linked with the risk of udder infection, mastitis, and elevated somatic cell calving. However, I have to go ahead and point out that this is not consistent. Some studies don't find that. Others do. And some have even found that ear inflammation and abscesses can be linked to this behavior as well. So that's the abnormal behavior, and people are very concerned about it. One, because we know it's not normal. So again, calves raised with cows don't do this, right? It is because we're grouping them together at a young age. And there are a lot of factors related to it. I'm happy to go into further detail to tell you some of those factors that we know management-wise help limit this behavior if you want to hear more.
No, absolutely. And that's a great point, because if we are able to actually minimize this issue or even mitigate completely, then there is no concern about fair housing. So tell us a little bit about when does that behavior begins, and what are some of the factors that are associated either with the mitigation or that kind of precludes the calves to do that?
Yeah, great question. So the first thing, I'm going to give a full disclaimer that there's a lot of unknowns, actually. This is a huge need in our industry to figure out why calves develop this behavior in the first place. We do know there's a lot of nutritional management factors that we control that helps limit the behavior. One is going to be feeding with a teat instead of an open bucket. So something about drinking time as linked to cross-sucking. We see a lot more of it when calves have less time on a teat. And particularly these open bucket calves are more motivated to perform that particular behavior. I think the thought is that a calf needs to spend 6 to 8 minutes suckling to realize it's full. And so perhaps maybe they're seeking to continue that behavior when they finish the meal before that. So that we know that teat feeding is really important. Volume is also important. So again, we see this more frequently in calves fed 6 liters a day or less. It's more higher proportion of their time is spent doing that when you limit feed. However, it's important to highlight that even when you're offering 8 liters a day, you're still going to see the behavior. It's just not as common. It's less time spent during the day doing that. Jennifer Venos has a study from Salter 2021 in JDS that shows that they still are spending 2% of their time doing that when they were observing. So it does still happen, but it's less frequent. Now, how much do they need to participate in this behavior to make damage? We don't know. That's a big old question mark, and that's why farmers are so concerned. The other thing that we can do is discourage the behavior through enrichment. So enrichment is kind of like this little fancy term, but really for nutritionists, what this means is you're giving the calf something to do besides being bored. So this is going to be something to perform that oral behavior, like foraging, for example. We know, and based on Emily Miller's work from Florida, that calves that spend time with long stem hay are less likely to spend non-nutritive oral behavior. So that's going to be pen sucking on things randomly in the pen. They're going to do less of that if they have something to graze on, like hay. And I should say forage because it's not actually grazing off the ground, but you know what I mean. So they have that. Salter, again, Venos, she's done a lot of cool work in this area. She's also found that this particular type of bottle that you can offer calf starter through, it's called a Braden bottle. That discouraged cross-sucking. So there's a lot of different things out there. Some people even found brushes discourage cross-sucking. So we know that the less bored the calves are, the less likely they are to do it. You brought up when they start the behavior. And that's a big question mark. The only study to my knowledge that's done that is mine. That I'll talk about here in this podcast. We saw that our calves started the behavior right at pairing. So the absolute latest that we saw this was day 1 after pairing. And these were calves that had a better diet. So they were on, a 26% crude protein, 20% fat, milk replacer. They were 7.4 liters a day, over 1 kilogram a day in solids. So again, these calves were not limit fed by any means, but they were still participating in that behavior despite having a more enriched environment. They had a Braden bottle with starter, etc.
So obviously keep the calves entertained and obviously properly fed with good balancing of the nutrition, certainly quite important. And you just mentioned your recent study. So tell us more about that. Tell us a little bit about what the study was and the rationale behind that, so we can start digging into those.
Yeah, so really at the end of the day, I was seeing our calves cross-sucking after they finished their milk meal, and they weren't doing it for a long time. So they were spending about a minute per day cross-sucking. So really small 10-second time bouts throughout the milk feeding phase, before and after the milk bottle was taken away. And I said, geez, like even with a really nice environment, they're still participating in this behavior. What can I do as a researcher to discourage them from participating in this, right? So we really took a big, deep dive in the literature. My grad student did a scoping review on this topic. That review about pair housing and how to feed calves, get the best benefits, and limit cross-sucking is published in Frontier Veterinary Science. But basically what we saw is that hay seemed to have a benefit no matter what the situation was. They could be on a more limit-fed diet. They could be in larger groups. They could be in groups of 4, groups of 10, in a robot setting. And no matter what, if they offered forage, it seemed to do some sort of discouragement of abnormal oral behavior. So sometimes discouraging sucking the pen, et cetera, right? And so we were like, wow, and particularly Cassandra Tucker at UC Davis found that this cross-sucking behavior is really increased at weaning. This is very common. We know this. We know that abrupt weaning really encourages the behavior, but more importantly, limit TMR feeding encouraged it, which is a problem because most of us are limit feeding our heifers to some degree, right? None of us are ad lib, here you go. Have all this stuff, right? So I thought, well, geez, forage is laying around the farm. We have this available. If I provide this to a calf at a young age, can I discourage the calves from doing this behavior? And I did some old my student Jillian Plogger did some great research from the 80s, reading into this really old literature from the library. And she found that pelleted forms of hay really seem to occupy calves' time more than other types of things. So she was like, let's do a study with that. Let's see what happens.
At Vitagro, we are the gut health experts, developing advanced microencapsulation technologies that deliver nutrients exactly where they are needed. Our rumen-protected solutions allow amino acids, vitamins, and organic acids to bypass degradation and reach the intestine intact. The result is higher nutrient efficiency, improved metabolic health, greater peak milk, and stronger reproductive performance. Stop guessing. Start targeting nutrition with precision. Vitagro, gut health delivered where it matters. Learn more at vetagro.com.
So obviously, there were some information there available, and then you design all this study. So tell us more about the design and what did you learn from that study that may help us to better transition to pair housing?
Yeah, great question. So we were offering a pelleted Timothy hay, and we were doing that because grass hay seemed to have the most benefits for rumen development. So not actually like providing butyrate, of course, because obviously hay doesn't offer that, but the acetate actually improves the musculature of the rumen. And so we thought, well, if we offer a pellet that the calf is more interested in, perhaps, and we can control nutritionally consistency, because one of the reasons a lot of farmers don't want to offer long stem hay is because it fills the calf up, right? And then they're not going to eat as much grain potentially. So the idea here was if we offer a pellet, maybe they won't get as full, maybe they'll still get the benefits. And so we offered this pelleted Timothy hay from the horse industry. And we matched it nutritionally to the last cut of Timothy hay that we had in a bale. So we wanted them to be as similar in ADF, NDF as we could possibly be. And the idea was then they would transition onto that later and be good to go. And we offered that at pairing. So these calves were paired at 3 days of age. Once they had a good, strong suckle and we knew they were ready, that's when the benefits for pair housing are observed. So we paired them then, and some got hay at the back of the pen in a trough, and the other ones got nothing extra. They just had their control diet. And so we were interested, when does cross-sucking start? Can hay stop the cross-sucking? Can hay improve growth, average daily gain, body weights, fecal scores? Can it slow down the gut and stop diarrhea, right? So we really did a deep dive into seeing if this could help our young paired house calves.
So is it fair to say that offering hay since the beginning will be helpful in minimizing cross-sucking? And more important, does it start later if it starts, or don't start at all?
What a great question. Yeah. So I kind of have been leaving you in suspense for really disappointing results. What we found is that offering this pelleted hay to calves at pairing did nothing for delaying cross-sucking. All of them started cross-sucking right at pairing or the day after pairing. And we were observing these calves for 21 days for 6 hours a day surrounding milk feedings. So the hour before, the hour after, both times in the day, and then a little bit after that. And again, we're talking thousands of hours of video. My student was so disappointed. And it didn't change how often they cross-sucked. They were spending about a minute a day on average cross-sucking. They were doing so in about 10 bouts. So we're talking really short intervals of this behavior happening. Now, is that how often calves cross-suck? We don't know, because the behavior is so hard to watch on video and so intensive that no one has ever followed them for 24 hours a day for months, right? That's impossible logistically. Maybe one day with computer vision, but not yet. So that's kind of where we're at. We didn't see anything with that. And sadly, very sadly, it did nothing for calf diarrhea outcomes. So we didn't see a change in how many calves got diarrhea. They all had diarrhea for about 4 days on average. Most of them had cryptosporidiosis, shocking, I know, or Clostridium shedding in their feces. And we didn't really see anything exciting there. Now, from a growth standpoint, we did have an interaction. So we saw a week by treatment interaction, and we did see a temporary growth benefit in those calves from weeks 4 to 7. But when I actually ran it on average daily gain, I didn't see that benefit. So again, I think that it just filled the calves up and they were heavier, but they weren't actually growing more efficiently. No difference in dry matter intake for calf starter, no difference in feed efficiency or feed conversion ratio. I know, very sad results, I'm sorry. But it seems like pelleted hay is not worth exploring for pair house calves.
Well, unfortunately, that's how research works. If we knew 100% of the things would work, we wouldn't have a job, because everything would be solved at this point, right? So unfortunately, that's how it usually goes. But no, Melissa, thank you for sharing that. Do you have any final remarks for people at home to consider?
Absolutely. So just some feedback. So my work is all in scientific review right now. Some feedback from the reviewers are that this doesn't mean that hay doesn't help pair house calves. There are quite a bit of farmers that swear by it, but right now, I don't think pelleted hay is the answer. So there are farmers out there that show that long stem alfalfa does help them. They really swear it discourages cross-sucking. I personally think that's potentially the case. I might take a break from forage research for a minute, since I didn't find anything after a 2-year thesis with a student. But I don't want to completely discourage hay, because it does still improve musculature in the rumen and strength of the rumen. It just didn't do anything for us when it came to growth benefits, really. I mean, body weight, maybe a couple weeks, not a big deal. Nothing exciting for a nutritionist, but I don't want to completely dismiss it and make people think I'm saying tear it off the shelves and don't ever use it.
No, absolutely. And certainly we need always a good combination of research conducted in different ways, multiple locations, multiple scenarios, so we can truly understand and then either move on from a specific strategy, or maybe understand that that's the way to go. Melissa, thanks again for sharing all this nice information with us today. And thank you at home for joining us for the podcast. And I hope to see you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.